Hello, my fellow strangers. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to talk about transmedia storytelling. So approximately 2 weeks ago, Jay, on his personal Facebook page, posted something which I'm about to read to you. It says, and I quote, "As a writer, I'm frustrated with how Rowling has presented facts outside of her books. The lore needs to be in the books, not handed out via Twitter or websites. Lord of the Rings may have mundane lore at times, but it's still accessible. If you want people to know Dumbledore was gay, fine. Show me where you put that in your books, because if it doesn't exist there, then it doesn't matter. If I have to search through the internet for information kept outside of your stories, especially if it's something that you wanted in your story, then you're doing a disservice to your fans. There are many places where internet doesn't exist, and many people who don't care to get on the internet. So if you want your fans to all have the same experience, then make sure your lore is in your books." End rant. As a fellow writer and someone who studies transmedia narratives, I actually am someone who disagrees with you a lot on this. This is not to say that you're not welcome to your opinion or that your opinion is somehow invalid or something like that. It's not saying that at all, but I do want to say that I wanted to provide some additional context and some counterpoints to some of the things that you say here, to sort of help people to perhaps think of this particular subject with a little bit more nuance or a little bit more complexly. I might not change your mind, but I hope that it will at least shed some additional light on ways that you could think about this topic. So let's delve into one of your first claims. You say, the lore needs to be in the books, not delivered via Twitter or websites. My primary concern with this notion is that it's incredibly limiting to creatives or writers, as it seeks to limit the medium and execution of artistic expression. Imagine, for example, if someone had told Michelangelo that artistic paintings belonged on canvases and not on ceilings or walls, then we wouldn't have the Sistine Chapel, for example. Or if imagine someone had told Edward Degas that he should stay in his lane as a painter, then we wouldn't have the statue Little Dancer of age 14. I realize that these aren't exact comparisons, but I think they are conceptually pretty close. Additionally, release of information outside of the more commercialized aspects of an artist's established industry can be a way to get around certain kinds of gatekeeping methods that might exist within their industry. So, for example, J.K. Rowling, who published the Harry Potter series in the mid to kind of late 90s, I think it was like 97 when Philosopher's Stone was published, would have been bound, at least to a degree, by what publishers thought would be appropriate content for children. Although industries for children's content have become less staunch over the last couple of decades, it is an area that tends to see more than its fair share of self-regulation within the industry itself. So publishers, as capitalistic enterprises, can at times be weary of publishing content that might receive pushback from populations that they want to buy and consume their products. And as a result of that, they may sort of limit the kinds of lifestyles that are depicted within their literature. Now, I'm not saying it's right that they do this sort of self-censorship thing, particularly when it comes to media and whatnot for children, but I think it is a reality of that particular industry, right? If you're creating content for children, you're oftentimes going to sort of kowtow to what is considered sort of appropriate for the most audiences, rather than looking at how niche audiences might be limited in their depiction. Again, not saying it's right. So of course I have no way of knowing if Rowling had taken up this idea of Dumbledore being gay at the time of publication. I think it's definitely a possibility, considering the era in which J.K. Rowling had the Harry Potter books initially published, that she may have received some pushback if she had tried to insert this homosexual narrative piece within the Harry Potter canon at the time. Additionally, I think some of the things that you say are a little bit counter to some of the realities of the transmedia landscapes that tend to currently exist within and around and through narratives. Take the film franchise The Matrix, for example, which also came out in the 90s. The franchise grew to include a plethora of paratextual or transmedia components, including animated shorts and games and even comics. And these all work together to build sort of this narrative landscape for fans, and all of which were produced or at least heavily influenced by the Wachowskis. So it ended up that those who interacted with several of those media components would have basically a deeper understanding of the story as a whole, while others just chose to experience or enjoy particular components of that transmedia narrative, right? They may have just played the game or just watched the movies or only read the comics, right? And even thinking about some of our Nerdfighter roots here, for example, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries is an example of transmedia storytelling, right? They had their main core story kind of on YouTube with specifically the Lizzie Bennet Diaries channel, and then they also used other social media platforms to include pieces of the story, right? So they had Twitter accounts, there was a character that had a LinkedIn profile, Lizzie had a lookbook. They used like all kinds of different social media platforms and put information and pieces of the story on all kinds of different platforms so people could interact with the story in whatever depth they were comfortable with. I can understand, of course, that for some fans, the idea of having you search across media platforms or engage with media that is outside the established platform for a specific text can be a little bit of an onerous task, or might be thought of as an onerous task. But for other fans, this is the kind of experience that they actually want. Some people want to delve deeper, to have more information than others, to feel like they might have some additional deep knowledge of a text or a narrative that others don't have. So as to your claim that Rowling is doing a disservice to her fans, I'm compelled to ask, which fans? Because for some fans, that's the exact kind of experience that they want. So when you state, if you want your fans to all have the same experience, then make sure your lore is all in your books. I would argue that A, not all fans want the exact same experience, and B, as a creative, Rowling, or really any creative, does not necessarily owe their fans any specific kind of experience revolving around the content that they produce. In any case, I think this issue is super complex, and I can understand how it could be frustrating or not necessarily in line with the wants of certain fans, but again, for others, this is the kind of immersive experience that they want. And for someone who is creating that content or is sort of the mind behind certain narratives, this really opens up their ability to create in ways that work well for them. So in other words, it's just really all very convoluted. So as you can tell, I disagree with you, but I can understand where some of your frustration comes from at the same time. But I hope this was sort of an interesting sort of counterpoint to the post that you put up. And I guess with that, I will just say, until next Monday, my fellow strangers, because I'll see you then. Bye.